Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Write Pack. Welcome back to Write Pack Radio. This is David Allen Lucas, your host, writer of mystery, science fiction, horror, and poetry. And my co-host...
Hello, I'm Kathleen Kayembe. I write GLBT romance under a pen name, and maybe that'll relate to the topic today.
Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits and the occasional something which is way out of my comfort zone. I wrote a little story called Until Cleopatra Lives at Number 7, which I'm going to read Tuesday night at the Amtrak station at the St. Louis Writers Guild open mic night.
Excellent.
I'm Matt McGraw. I'm an amateur writer. I write mostly fantasy kind of things, maybe some sci-fi. I'm working on a book called Patrick the Spider with my cousin Jennifer Stolzer.
I'm T.W. Finley. I write historical fantasy and science fiction. My debut novel came out in 2011 called Zero Time, and most recently one of the Zero Time Chronicle novelettes came out in audiobook. So I'm really excited about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a young adult fantasy writer and illustrator and book cover designer. Working on whatever.
I'm Brad Narcook, president of St. Louis Writers Guild, publisher at Blank Slate Press, and I am a steampunk author, and my book will come out later this year.
Congratulations.
Yay.
Today on Write Pack Radio, we're going to talk about what I'm going to call brown bagging books and the brown bagged reader. What am I talking about? A situation recently occurred in Ohio, and this is kind of something which I've always seen growing up when I was a kid, is are you judged by what you read? The situation that came to light recently in Ohio, I am making a lot of assumptions based on the information that was given, is that a young adult, I don't want to use the word couple, but man and woman, probably in their early 20s, went out on a first date. And the guy had the woman over. She saw his bookshelf. Then he called her and sent her flowers for a second date. She never returned the call. In the process, somehow a radio station gets involved. And all this to me tells me that this is a very young adult couple, or young adult man and woman. And the radio station calls the woman and asks her, hey, why haven't you called this guy back for a second date? What's going on? And she says that she looked at his bookshelf and saw that he had the Hunger Games on there. And he says that he had Twilight and some other books that fall in that type of range of reader. And she said that she thought he was a young teenage girl inside of a man's body, and thus did not want anything to do with him. So my question to you all at the Write Pack is, are we judged by what we read? Do writers get a pass? And is it fair?
I think writers get a pass. It's research.
It's research.
Exactly.
I was going to say, my Google search had better, that better get a pass.
Yeah.
There's a lot in there I don't want public.
The NSA is not giving you a pass on your Google search.
I know.
All writers are probably on that list.
I'm okay with the NSA looking. I don't really care about that.
Yeah, how I have not ended up on a no-fly list with everything, since I write horror and mystery and science fiction.
How many bodies can you fit in a walk-in closet?
And I've looked that type of stuff up.
I'm just hoping the NSA knows that, it's a writer. Just move on.
Yeah, exactly.
How to crush and sever bones.
Yeah.
Oh.
What's the smell of burning flesh?
Actually, I wonder if there's a Google how-to on that.
There probably is.
Well, I know, I'm now getting us back on topic. When I transferred from private school back to a public school when I was in 7th grade. So this is years and years and years ago. And I was diagnosed with a learning disability, which at the time, the teachers thought that meant you were stupid. They didn't understand that it actually means you have a high IQ, but a low area in a couple academic areas. And my reading comprehension was off the board. But I brought some Star Trek comic books to school because I was bored with the books they were assigning. Actually, I had finished usually those books, and they were boring to me. But I know back then I got judged by the teachers as well as by some of the students. Oh, that's just more proof that he's got a second or first grade reading level. 2 years later, just kind of put that in perspective, I forced the system to retest me. I'm not going to tell you what all the scores were, but I will happily tell you that my reading comprehension at that time was equal to a doctorate level 2 years later. So as an example of a misguide. But anyway.
Well, I mean, comic books have always gotten a bad rap anyway. So beyond that, there are books that come with them a certain, stereotype or whatever you want to call it. But, comic books being one, romance novels being another, whatever scary horror novels, being another. But
Genre fiction.
yeah, I mean, even sci-fi can be bad to some people. But God, I hope we're not judged. Because I read a lot and a whole variety of things. So.
Well, you're a writer. You're clearly exempt and on the NSA's list, like watch list.
Yes.
So, but I think the cultural overall perception of certain genres has a lot to do with whether or not certain things are acceptable to read. For example, since Comic-Con has gotten huge and apparently girls go there now, sorry, that's a thing another time. Since Comic-Con is pretty big news and a lot of media is going there now to introduce new superhero movies based on superhero comics, it's a lot more okay. I like to see fantasy and horror elements in what people read, what people see on TV, True Blood. So
It's interesting to say that before I let anyone else jump in, is not that long ago, as you're hinting, Comic-Con was looked down upon. Now, Hollywood is not just using it for superhero comics and superhero stories to come out as well as science fiction ones. Now you're seeing mysteries.
everything.
Everything is coming to Comic-Con as let's see how people react to this idea.
Cosplay used to be fans dressing up like their favorite characters, and now it is literally a job and a stepping stone into greater things within the Hollywood industry.
There was a reality show on Sci-Fi about it.
Exactly.
We probably
So,
shouldn't advertise for that show.
but the point is that it's no longer just about the fan experience, which is what cosplay originally was.
Well, nerd culture is totally in vogue nowadays.
This is true.
It's thanks to Marvel and Disney and the Avengers and the Lord of the Rings movies and all these really popular, well-made things, but also like The Big Bang Theory and nerd characters being presented as hyper-intelligent, a little weird, maybe perhaps kind of cute kind of characters in stuff nowadays. So it's... And Sci-Fi Channel, I'm so sorry. Sci-Fi Channel is making Siffy... they've created like 4 or 5 shows now about geek culture, and there are reality shows where they get in nerd offs.
My Big Geek Wedding today.
My Big Geek Wedding?
Yes, it's a new show coming to TV.
So people get married by Darth Vader and stuff?
There's all kinds. Check your
Super
local
Mario
listings.
cakes.
Not only is there a horrible title, there's also a horrible show underneath it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's truly
But
the
here's
worst.
the kicker to that. So when nerd culture goes away, which undoubtedly it will at some point, are we then all going to have to start hiding our comic books behind, time?
Oh, is it going to be a cyclical thing, you think?
Most trends are cyclical. So, just whereas, the Victorian age kind of invented the bodice ribbon, I guess not, because you had the French romances before that.
I don't know anything about bodices, just by the way.
I hear you rip them.
Yes. Well, that's one kind of book, apparently. So,
Only when a guy
yeah.
with a chiseled chin shows up.
but fantasy is another one, like a perfect example of geek culture. Like, I remember not necessarily taking my fantasy covers wherever I would, because some of them were, questionable to most people, I guess. You had the scary religious people who would yell at you for reading demon books, and
Oh, that's
Then
I
you
thought
have-
Harry Potter was going to send kids to hell.
exactly.
Well, and I love that you said that. I'm going to stay in this topic, but jump away from books for technically a second. Is back in the day, religious people were really coming down on Dungeons and Dragons.
LARPing too.
Speaking personally, and I think, Brad, you and I had this conversation a while back, running that game, which is a whole entire book-created game, taught me how to write, taught me how to plot, and how to make characters and so forth. And yet, I had to hide that even at home. My parents were not religious, but they bought into the hype at the time, in which even it was a movie with Tom Hanks was a role player, and it somehow broke his mind, and he thought he was living in that time period or whatever.
I'm sure that was Tom Hanks.
I'm pretty sure it was.
So I used to have a D&D group, and one of the members of that group had to sneak out of her house as if she were running out on some Friday night to go crazy or something like that, because her parents were afraid that she was demon worshipping.
Go.
Well, okay, so this brings me back to the topic, is it fair to judge? And if so, for whom? Is it fair to make that judgment? In a lot of these cases, the people doing the judging were not actually familiar enough or at all with what they were stigmatizing others for, reading. And just because they led the culture didn't mean that they were actually the experts who should have been leading the culture on certain issues. A lot of religious people, I remember, had come down on Harry Potter, but not the ones I knew who were familiar with Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not fair to put a big blanket on religious people.
No,
Yeah.
you can't.
It's a pretty specific group that hears mention of magic in a fictional thing, and has sort of a
vocal minority.
1200s
Yeah.
sort of violent reaction to it, which is really that's based around when Christianity was sort of supplanting pagan religions in Europe, is they had to kind of demonize all that druidic stuff as devilish or and all that magic.
We're seeing a couple of things going on, though. I mean, it's like Harry Potter broke down a lot of the barriers for fantasy, and I think we're seeing, 50 Shades of Grey is doing kind of the same thing for eroticism, like it or not, and for whichever side you're on, and some of us like it very well. I see that smile over there.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of people who like it now.
Yeah, or
Yes.
finally, and you could put it on the table. Is it because of the technology we have? Because you can't see the covers of your books, because you don't have to explain to somebody you're sitting next to on the plane what you're reading. I
You
know,
also don't have to buy it from a person at a
Right.
counter and put it in front of them and say, "I would like to have this for $20."
right, exactly. It makes a big difference.
That made a big difference for men and pornography. Is the consumption is a lot more now because you can get it over the internet and you don't have to talk to anybody. You don't
think
have to
that-
go to the shady part of town or anything.
I almost hate to
Shady
fade into
parts
this
with-
one, but what Teresa was saying, and in a way also what Matt's saying, we've seen a huge increase in the sale of romance novels to men. And a lot of it's done electronically because they don't. You can be sitting there, you can be reading on your Nook or your Kindle or your computer screen, and nobody can see what you're reading because they can't see the cover.
I think there's a whole lot of snobbery involved in the whole business of reading.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it comes from every possible direction.
Exactly.
In the Post-Dispatch today, for example, there was an article on the top picks, and they have the top 100 picks if you go to their website. Well, in the top 10, how many do you think were fiction?
Most of them.
3.
Oh, really?
And 2 of those were for teenage girls. There was only one adult fiction on the entire first 10 of them.
I could
And what
see
I
that.
think that says is, and we know that some of the big fiction sellers are actually the best sellers in the land, that people don't want to admit that they read fiction, period. Because fiction is a waste of time.
Well, you do have the whole intellectual crew who believes that the memoir or the biography or the book that's going to teach them something is far superior than the book that's just going to entertain them. I personally don't believe in that. I'd rather be entertained.
While
but,
you learn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
there's a lot of learning in fiction, but
Well, and also how much are you really going to learn from one person's life? Even if you
Well,
talk to people who are successful,
Yeah.
they don't necessarily know how they got there either. And
well,
and how much
memoirs
are you going
one,
to be
but
able to apply their
What about the
practices to you?
industrialized nations of the late 19th century or something like that? I mean,
History's good to know. I guess,
that's a book that's going to teach you a lot, and a lot of people are going to go, "Oh, this is a very intellectual book," and
Fall asleep.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the funny thing. We make fun of these books as well because we're all fiction readers who are like, "Geez, that's just nonfiction." But there's a ton of people reading nonfiction. I think we all just, I don't know, read what you want. Please,
Yes.
just read what you want.
And
Whatever
one
holds your
thing
interest.
against the intellectual snobs, may I call their attention to the very books they like to promote that are fiction. A lot of their books, and I'm sorry, I'm not a John Steinbeck fan, and I'm not going to go off on them here, but a lot of the books that they like John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath.
Ouch.
keeping that one.
Okay.
That is staying on the record. Don't let him take that off.
Someone write that.
Sure.
Grapes of Wrath were about the dispossessed during the Depression. And that was a teaching thing, and I was looking at social change. Another one I'm going to throw out there is Sinclair's The Jungle. is also one that actually, that book led to changes in the meat industry. Because at the time it was being written, when you had sausage or hot dogs, you really didn't know what kind of meat was in there. It could have been human, among other things.
Don't eat the mystery meat.
So,
Soylent Green is people.
the idea of fiction, that someone said, and I wish I could remember who it was now because I wasn't prepared with this, but someone said fiction is nothing more than the truth wearing a mask.
Yeah, well, I mean, all science fiction is, an allegory of the time in which it was written.
Well, an interesting thing I heard you say is, let's see, intellectual people, their books. And it's...
Yeah, isn't that making you non-intellectual?
Verbiage.
Well, no, there's like an idea I'm hearing here.
Reverse snobbery?
There's like different groups of people,
Yes.
and they're all in competition.
Readers come in cliques.
And like they
Yes, they do.
identify based on what they read.
I
And
believe we are
it's just
called
like high
us
school.
and them.
Yeah, see,
we
we're
should-
pretty good, but they're bad.
We should
Oh, yeah.
all be one. What's wrong? They're books. They're lovely things. I read romance. I read fantasy. I read nonfiction.
So you're a traitor, basically.
I read everything. I'm a centrist of reading. I sit there in the center and I read all the books around me in the bookstore. At least I'd like to.
You can't be neutral in this. You cannot.
I'm not neutral.
Actually, you
no,
can
I'm
be.
just
You can be-
centered.
Oh, so you're a writer, aren't you?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
We're
never
all
mind.
exempt anyway.
Exactly. Do you know most of the books I've read in the last few years are either people I know who've published the book or a book that I am working on. So it's that, like, literally that's been my reading the last couple of
And
years.
that's kind of an interesting thing too, because I have read books I never would have read
Exactly.
because of people, who are writing them, and because I know them, I read them, and I've been surprised, very often, very nicely surprised, because of the things I've read. So it kind of has broadened my perspective and my snobbery to where
Yeah.
used to be, maybe I wouldn't pick up a romance book, but I started hanging out with romance writers when I first started, and I got a whole different exposure to the genre. And, it's a different appreciation, so a lot to be learned.
Very
there.
true. And I very much the same story in terms of romance. I did not read romance. I never would have read romance. And now I must confess to having read many romances because I know the authors or,
I didn't.
Go ahead.
I didn't think I was a big fan of romance, and I write it now, and it was a revelation to me to realize that a lot of the stories that I liked reading had romance elements that I didn't mind. I thought they were great, and also Disney.
How many stories in
Happily
that?
Ever
That's
After.
a perfect.
All
Yeah.
of the fairy tales ever.
Exactly.
Almost every story out there, and I say almost because there are a ton that don't, but almost every story has a romance element to it. I mean, especially some of the great ones. You're mentioning all the Disneys. I mean, what Disney does not have a romance at its core?
And fairy
The
tales
Emperor's
like
New
Exactly. Okay,
Okay.
thank you for proving the rule.
She had to pull
The one that proves the rule.
And it was
actually,
instant,
no.
too,
There's a
just-
husband and a wife pair in Emperor's New Groove, and they are adorable.
He said is central to the plot.
Yeah, I did say kind of centralized to the plot because most of
It's
them
not
are boy.
Let's
meets
not
girl,
argue
and,
about
yeah.
Emperor's New Groove.
Let's argue
Ralph
about
also
Yes.
doesn't have a romance at the core.
Are you
Well,
sure?
the broadest
Yeah.
Are you
definition of
positive?
romance is
John
that
C.
it's
Reilly and
adventure.
Sarah Silverman do not have a romance in that movie.
Right.
They're all kinds
I
of adventures.
don't know.
I think Fedora just raised a good point.
Yeah, very much so. And I know we were talking over it, but as Fedora said,
The broadest definition of romance is simply that it's adventure, and there are all kinds of adventures.
and with that, I'm going to throw out that a lot of the classical literature that men like to read, Three Musketeers. There's
Yep.
actually a trilogy there. The Scarlet Pimpernel,
There's romance there.
and romance there, and those are called romances.
Moreover, weren't they serials?
Some were.
Some were, some weren't. Depends on
Oh,
which
so
one you're on.
trashy.
Yes. Well, the French romances, I mean, which is where all of these come from. I mean, they were originally the, like, Arthurian tales where you have Lancelot and the ladies and, where you get all the steamy stuff of the Arthurian romances, all came from the French romances. I mean, that was the hot soap opera of its day, basically. So, I mean, historically, there's always been romance. It's part of the human life and condition. Why would we not write about it?
Exactly.
But what does it mean to write about it?
Well, I
Or
think the
to
point
read
is
about it.
I think the point is that in every story you're going to find the romance, the action, the adventure, the mystery, the intrigue, and we try and break that up and say, "Oh, I only like reading this." When in reality, you're reading it all. You're just centering on one as a genre or whatever.
And that's
Yeah, one
marketing rather
Exactly.
than anything.
That's just telling you where to put them on the shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd all be going by alphabet, and that would just take forever.
So, in part, do we judge books because of the way they're marketed? Like, and
Yeah.
shelved
I
in
think so.
bookstores, even if you don't,
I think we
The
do,
back cover,
and I think we
the
have
front
to.
cover?
I think we're guided to do it. Because anything with marketing is to guide the consumer's mind to where the marketer wants you to go.
The aim of marketing is to sell something.
Right.
And when you're in a bookstore or anywhere else, part of the categorizing of the books is to help you find things that you know you will probably like. But because some things are more okay to read than others, does that also cause people to not be as open-minded when they go into bookstores or anywhere else? Like, they just go to their section and stop? And is that a good thing? Should there be more crossing of...
I think it's definitely a bad thing, just because of our descriptions of everyone earlier talking about finding new things. There's, isn't it wonderful to find something new that you didn't know that you liked and like it? It's like you grow a little,
You do.
and you can't get that if you stay in your one section of the bookstore.
And I'm going to jump exactly where you're going and I'm going to break away from using the genres being science fiction, mystery, horror. I'm going to break this genre into the terms of your traditional group genre, being what some in the industry have called white bread, to Asian American writers, to African American writers. You walk into a bookstore, not depending on the size, you definitely walk into a Barnes & Noble, a good-sized bookstore. If I'm looking for a mystery, I go over to the mystery section. Meanwhile, there could be a whole group of mysteries over in the African American writers section, and usually there are, and I don't know about them because they're not in the area which I'm looking for. And I understand the reasons behind the breakup is to call more attention to them, and I don't really want to go down this road too far. I want to save that for another time. But it makes you go. It makes you wonder: is the intention, which is good, a disservice to the reader because they're not being exposed to more in that area that they're looking at.
I think it might be more of a disservice to the writer. Anthony John, who writes young adults, he wrote Elemental, which is up for Churchill and all various materials like that, says that it frees him up entirely to write about anything that he wants because young adult is simply shelved as young adult, not as separate genres.
Right.
What do you guys think then about the genre crossing that's been going on a lot? For instance, Grimm is a police procedural and a, fairy tale, dark horror fantasy TV show. All at once.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about like crossing genres, this is a really big trend that's going on right now, and it's for exactly the reason we're talking about in terms of getting more exposure. If you've just written a paranormal romance, then you have both the paranormal readers who are going after ghosts and other creatures and mystical things like that, and then you have your traditional romance readers who might pick it up. So they're banking on two different audiences liking that book. And so far it's worked in a lot of respects, that you have these crossover genres and they do attract both audiences to that book. And that's why. So you're trying to get an even greater exposure. I think you're going to see more of it. And to be honest, I think more books could be represented as crossing genre than are actually thrown out as being a crossing of genre.
Let me throw something out about genre real fast, and I agree with what Brad's saying is genre really is an invention sometime in the 1970s or so. They came out for booksellers to be able to put books on shelves. Genre merging or bringing different genres together have been going on, I don't know for how long, but I'll throw out Arthur Conan Doyle with Sherlock Holmes. If you look at Sherlock Holmes and you look at it in the time period it was written, it is both mystery and science fiction. Because it's forensic science and forensic psychology coming about into its day and being merged with a detective fiction, and you end up really having mystery and science fiction combined.
That's true. That thing with the science fiction, because that thing he does with the ashes, the cigar ashes, is completely, that never came true. He just thought, certainly this could happen at some point. I'm just going to put it in there.
And then let's jump to, when did it start coming out? 1950s. Book-wise, and movies in the 60s started coming out. James Bond is spy thriller. Spy thriller meets science fiction. All of his gadgets.
Moonraker.
Oh, yeah, book and movie, but anyway, yes, Moonraker. The movie was a true sci-fi, but all of it, really, a lot of all that stuff is science fiction meets another genre. So I think sometimes the idea of genre trips up the reader as well as sometimes trips up the writer.
That's interesting that you say the idea of genre, because my next question was then, how do you guys think that the increased connectivity in the world and the prevalence of internet bookstores and websites like Goodreads, where people can just review the books that they like or they don't like, how do you think those have affected people's decisions to be open or not to new books or new genres that they may not have wanted to even consider before or thought existed before?
Well, the internet has really, I mean, if you look at Goodreads, Amazon, any of those, they have the recommended. And those are not always necessarily in the genre of which you've just entered in, whatever book. And you can debate algorithms all you want, but the visibility of it, being able to just click on something and see a whole variety of books. I mean, you're seeing stuff you never would see. I mean, you'd have to walk all around a bookstore for hours and hours and hours, which, okay, we all at this table have done, but the majority of people may not do at every bookstore they enter, in every city they enter. But yeah, so to that end, I think the internet has really opened it up. I think other things, social media, the best way of marketing a book has always been, you've got to read, I just read this book, you've got to read this book, here you go. That has always been one of the best marketing tips, and getting somebody to read a book. And I think with the internet, that's only grown. We now have the ability to see that it's coming like, oh, this book's got 5 stars. Oh, that's excellent.
It's not just the one kid in your town that's like, oh, whatever, they read that. It's kids from everywhere saying, this is amazing. You're like, maybe that kid knows something I don't.
I mean, if you look at like some of the more specific, like some of the really just amazing like bullying or some of the real teen psychological books that are out there, I mean, those books probably would not have gotten much push in a non-internet culture, because you're dealing with people who are vulnerable, exposed, people who are not necessarily going to share that I read this amazing book about how I cut myself, or something along those lines. These are topics that now, through the internet, through help groups, through just, contact with other people who maybe have these same, traumas as you can get this book in your hand. You can read it. This book can change your life. And to be honest, that is something that would just never have been in the pre-internet culture. I don't think you would have gotten the level of exposure that some of the great writers who write some of these books now, can do.
There's I think the big thing there with the recommendation is that, even if somebody, like a regular person, spent an hour looking around, an hour looking around a bookstore, it's not a matter of just seeing the book. It's also having an impetus to buy it over the other 5,000 that are in there. Like, there's just looking at the backs, like, if you don't trust your own, like, judgment enough to be like, read the first page and know, you need somebody with, like, some sense of authority or some sort of little push to just get you to settle on the one.
Someone who knows enough of your tastes. In some cases, an algorithm.
Amazon really hopes that's their 5-star thing.
That was really why I quit reading science fiction when I was younger, because I did not know anybody else who was reading it. And there's some really, really bad science fiction out there.
Very much so.
And, so if you're out there stumbling around, bookstores and garage sales and stuff like that, you're going to come across some stuff that you just really don't want to read. And so it really has helped, as things have progressed, to be able to find things that are excellent. And I never have trouble finding anything now.
Can I open up a can of worms then? Fandom. Connectivity on the internet has allowed people, not just like who love a particular genre, but a particular fandom, say Star Trek or Star Wars, because I read those, to know that there are other people out there and to gather, at least online, and chat about things that they love that they may not be able to do with, most of the people around them physically.
Well, let me throw right in there. There is a science fiction author he's one of my favorite, I'm going to admit to it, David Weber, who writes the Honor Harrington series. And it turns out now there are Honor Harrington conventions. There are Honor Harrington fan clubs where people dress up and cosplay just like they do with Star Trek and just like they do with Star Wars.
I have actually yet to find a true fandom that doesn't have, its community. Whether it be, D&D, whether it be, a certain particular Star Wars, Star Trek, Firefly, anything like that. Even some of the crazier stuff that some of the teens and other people are into that you would consider less fandom, like Vampire Diaries or, even some of the, Arrow for one. So I think in this age, there's almost a fandom for everything now.
Everything has its message board.
Yeah.
Everything has its fan fiction, which
Yes.
is a that's
Rather stigmatized by a lot of people too.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a little further down.
That's
the
a whole
totem
area of
pole.
people
We'll leave
talking
that
about
one out
that.
for
yeah.
now because that is an entire other discussion.
Yeah,
Yes.
the only thing I will say about
Because
fan
everyone
fiction-
looks bad at fanfic. No, just
Well,
Excuse you?
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally joking.
the only thing I'm going to say about fan fiction, and then I'm going to shut up about it, is it's a dangerous fiction. It's a dangerous fiction because it plays with someone else's copyright. And
You're opening
to
the
borrow
can of worms.
several lines from various authors I've heard, fan fiction does not exist. If fan fiction existed, and that means I would have to acknowledge fan fiction of my books exist, thus I would have to sue my readers for their use
Well-
of my copyright.
No one's holding his hand over a stove.
But what they're trying to say is they know this exists. They love that their readers are doing fanfic, but on the legal side, if they admit to it, that they know that it exists, and technically by their contracts and all that stuff with the traditional publishers and by themselves as well, they might have to go after them for monetary reasons.
Just don't try and make money on fanfic.
On that
Yeah,
subject,
just don't
though,
publish your
Oh.
this is all about money again, which brings me back to marketing and judging people. Is it fair to judge people based on what monetary issues? Sorry,
No, if you want to read fanfic,
no, not just fan fiction.
no, I know, but anything, go for it and run with it. Read it. It's yours. Take it in, make it a part of you.
It's better than being part of the TV tribe.
If you want to, but if you want to go out and try and make money, or if you're going to try and market something, then that's something that you have to rethink and you have to come back to, in terms of what you want to do. But in terms of reading, I don't think there should ever be a limit on what we read.
And creating as well.
Yeah.
Being inspired by something is not a crime.
No,
No,
you
not
And
can
at all.
draw a
flexing your
picture.
muscle, flexing your muscles is how you get stronger.
To me, fanfic is just like doodling. I'm writing in my favorite world the same way I could doodle a picture of a Jedi. I'm going to write about a Jedi. And it's, so long as I don't try and make any money, Disney has nothing to come after me for.
I think Jennifer, you said there's what was it? The forum for every.
Yeah,
A
so
message board for every
There's a
fandom.
message board for everything.
There. So, because there is a message board for everything, and we know that other people are like us, reading whatever it is we're reading, does the judgment of others who are not on that message board, for example, does it matter as much now whether people judge us for what we read?
Oh, yes.
And if so, who judging you
I
is
have
the worst?
witnessed the
It doesn't
fandom wars.
Yes.
I know who is pitched against who in the fandom verse. It's human nature to be competitive
Yes.
and to be aggressive to people who have different opinions than you. Unfortunately,
them.
yes.
I think for the same reason we
makes-
have cliques in high school, we're
Yeah.
going to have different areas of readers who are going to look badly at other...
You want to feel included, so therefore
Exactly.
someone has to be excluded. Otherwise, there is no inclusion.
I think people are better off in the age of the internet, though, because it used to be like if you had some really niche interest, you'd probably be the only person maybe in your town that you knew that was into that. And now, because the internet is there, you can always find your little group. And you'll be like, hey, I'm the one that's from Australia.
Yep.
Oh, there's only one of you there. That's so interesting.
Exactly.
So there's a wider group of people that are like you, and it's not just you. Does it make it easier when then other people are like,
that's empowering.
you're reading what was it? He had Hunger Games on his show?
Hunger Games, which
You're
I
reading
definitely...
Hunger Games and you're a boy. Oh no, except that then there's an entire population
Yeah.
obsessed with the Hunger Games.
Somewhere there's a ton of male readers screaming out and, I read the Hunger Games!
So does that make it easier in these cases to deal with the judgment, or does it change anything?
Did nobody call into the radio show, like any women, be like, I'll take him.
Yeah.
Send him on over.
Yeah,
You know,
you think.
I would think so.
That's
I
an
don't
educated,
know this
rounded
one.
man
Hang
who
on
reads.
just a minute. I think any woman who had a grain of sense would say, right on. Make sure that you
Yeah.
like a guy before you go out with him again.
Oh, no.
She had
was
no
the wrong person for me.
obligation
Yeah.
Yeah.
She has
to
no, gosh no.
say anything to him even.
As a friend of mine said, oh my God, he read! He reads! Just that alone.
He reads books with female main characters and
Wow.
enjoys
Well,
them?
okay, since we're jumping on that bandwagon, let's talk about guys.
Actually, let me pause,
And what
pause for a
guys
second.
read, yeah.
Let me pause for a second, and then I'll turn this over to you. When this first came out, this idea for today's episode came out, I posted this question across a bunch of writing Facebook groups, asking, hey, what's your opinion? Give me your thoughts, and that way we feed into it. And one of the statements that was written I absolutely loved is, the guy admits, yes, I do read that. And you know why? So I know what the girls are talking about.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
You know, I
And
also
that can be scary too.
Well, I also, you know, I read some romance just because it's good. I mean, you know, some of the paranormal romances, I mean, yeah, there's some romance in it, but there's also a lot of demon slaying and a lot of kicking butt and a lot of craziness. So I'm reading the book, yeah, and I'm not reading it because it's a romance. But this goes to why guys read. And to be honest, there's a whole push now that, oh, we've got to get guys back into reading, and, oh, guys only like one kind of book, and that's the, you know, they call it guy porn right now, and it's, you know, I love detectives, and I love thrillers, and I love spies, but, you know, I loved, you know, the Ian Fleming novels and everything else, but is that the only thing I'm going to read because I'm a guy? And no, the answer is no. There's a ton of other stuff on the shelf that I'm going to read, and, you know, in no way does that affect my manhood.
Okay,
Agreed.
so on that note, then marketing stereotypes, guy fiction, it sounds like they're not entirely accurate to the actual demographic of readers who are...
Well, I am sure there are a lot of guys out there who want to read a book where the main character goes around and beds every woman that he sees and shoots everyone that he's looking at. You know, so to be honest, those novels, they probably resonate with a lot of men. So it's probably smart to market those books to men. But the notion that that's the only thing that's going to draw men back into reading is just not really true. I mean, to be honest, we need to get more boys reading, and then those men will grow up and continue reading.
I dare say it's the opposite of the idea that everything for a female child must be pink.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, the same thing is happening to all sorts of groups when the core decision-making body is not entirely sure what they're looking at as far as a market goes.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kids' novels, I mean, that's a great area. How many kids' novels now are read by adults? Middle grade included. I mean, Harry Potter's probably read by more adults than children. I mean, probably not, but there are a lot of children. But
There was a time when it was.
Yeah.
Now they've grown up and they're still reading it.
Really
Exactly.
need to stop undercutting your superlatives there. Like you say them and then you
Yes.
just undercut them
Like,
immediately.
wait, I didn't really believe that strongly.
One of the things I find
I'm trying to prevent emails.
Oh, that's inevitable.
one of the things I find interesting about strong female protagonists and supposedly men don't want to read that, and I call that BS. I'll come out of the proverbial closet and say I am a Batgirl fan, and I loved Willow in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Whoa, I'm out of here. This
That's
is
it. That's it. But Joss Whedon is constantly asked, and so is
I love his answer, by the way.
I love his answer. Joss Whedon is constantly asked why in his screenplays and in his comic books does he write about strong female characters? And his response is, because you're still asking.
Yep.
Yes.
So, J.R.R. Martin, right?
That's the
Is that
name I
it?
was
Didn't
trying
I
to
say
think
that right?
of. Yeah, I think.
Yes.
No, it's
Wrong.
G.
G.
Gee, George.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I
It's
was thinking
grr.
Tolkien as well. I was smashing them together, which I'm sure he would consider a great honor.
Like Game of
Probably
Thrones.
pretty close.
Yeah, Game
Maybe.
of Thrones.
And he says because women are people, and if going back to my favorite sci-fi writer, David Weber, the Honor Harrington series is literally a story set in space. Think of Napoleonic Wars, and the main character is a female character, and she knows how to kick butt, and she studies female.
This sounds like another topic that we're going to talk about
Probably.
in another week, but writing characters, not stereotypes of gender or race or ethnicity or whatever, is what's important. And readers identify and love things with characters, regardless of the gender of both the characters and the readers. Is marketing just not catching up, or is it something else?
Well, in terms of writing, if you're writing stereotypes, you're writing flat characters.
Yes.
Those are not well-rounded characters. Those aren't deep characters. I mean, you should go well beyond the stereotypes of any given, person, character's type, archetype, whatever. I mean, please reach beyond the stereotypes.
But it's more than a marketer can sell in a blur.
And that's true.
They're in a blur.
The marketer will always sell the stereotype because it's the most generalized way of being able to aim at the most amount of people.
And to defend the marketer, usually they really have a soundbite to get your attention.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you need that soundbite.
Right.
It's the only thing that's going to grab somebody's attention.
Exactly.
other than word of mouth, which now apparently seems to be complementing the sound bites and everything.
Well, word of mouth is all. I mean, if you go back and you look at the literature that got passed around when, say, the Oz series was running around, and I mean, Frank or
The Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz. Thank you. That was a long-running series that ran, and kids. It was, the Harry Potter of its day. It was the big kids fiction. It had, there were tons and tons of marketing that went around every library, bookstore, wherever you were going to find kids. However, the real reason those books were massively successful is because every parent went out and told every other parent, you've got to get your kid to read these books because they're so magical and wonderful and kids love them. And that's what sold it. That's what got it out. That's what turned it into a giant success. So word of mouth is always going to be what creates the giant success. Marketing's, I think marketing's an add to the word of mouth.
Okay.
Let me ask this question, staying on the judging of what you read. Is being judged for what you read impacted you as a writer in what you write?
No, because I'm unnecessarily secretive about everything. So nobody knows what I read.
So nobody knows what you read, nor do they know what you write.
No, it's all hidden away.
There you go.
Yes.
Oh no, Jen, you cannot tell us what he is writing with you. Secret is going to be out and wait.
She shows everybody, though.
Except he said at the beginning what
Like,
he's doing.
she's just
so-
Sorry,
oh,
yeah.
hi, do you want to see my new book?
Is
We're
that
teaching
your,
him
Is that your
marketing.
decoy book?
I told his mother what we were working on before he told his mother what we were working on.
Oh man.
Well, I didn't want to tell her because the first one is it's
No,
very
don't get
poor
into it,
for
yeah.
mother.
Oh,
Well, to that end, I guess,
Mother.
what are your guilty pleasures in reading? Are any of us willing to throw out what our guilty
Should they
pleasures?
be guilty pleasures?
you should read
Exactly.
my book because my book is just a combination of all my favorite tropes all smashed into one cover.
Okay.
The other night, Jennifer and I were actually making lists. Well, I was making lists. She was drawing awesome things. And
I was drawing pictures.
helping jog my mind with things that she loves. Making lists of all the awesome things, all the tropes and the character types and everything that we love reading and seeing in fiction. And also on the other side of the page for me, a list of things that I cannot stand. And most of those were flat, stereotypical things that just need to go away.
Most of it was, most of our dislike pile were things that we were tired of seeing. That we kept experiencing over and over and over again in books and TV and movies and music and all sorts of things. So it was all the tired, unimaginative, lifeless.
So you don't like
Drag.
So you don't like the idea of chasing these little niches that suddenly appear, fads that appear.
Well, more like you can, if you're inspired by something, I'm going to use the word inspiration a million times, but if you're inspired by something, then go for it. I know that my novels are inspired by things that I have read or watched that I've loved, but then you're getting in, if you're just chasing something you don't have any passion in it, then yes, you've written something flat that has no life and has no soul and has no legs of its own. It's leaning on someone else's work in order to stand upright. And that's the stuff that we don't like seeing anymore.
You had asked about guilty pleasure reading, Brad. I adore gay romance. I write gay romance. So it's not really a guilty pleasure, it's just something I enjoy anyway.
But is it something you admit to most people that you read?
Yes, I do, except
I was like, she just admitted to the entire world.
Okay, yes.
the only reason I write under a pen name is because of stigma from certain
Yes.
people and trying to protect other people in my family who would be unfairly stigmatized
And
because of
I
what
see
I
nothing
do.
wrong with that. In
Yeah.
terms of what you write, but in terms of what you read, I tell right off the bat, I'll tell you most of what I read, and I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few things that I read. I used to not tell people that I was as much in love with some of the Dragonlance novels or some of the other TSR novels as I am. And as I've grown up, I care less, But, and plus now, fantasy has become more mainstream with things like Game of Thrones being on. So I can embrace that and I can say that, but I didn't always. I'd talk about preferring, classical novels or that great, piece of literature, or things that were more along those kinds of lines as opposed to saying, I'm a huge fan of the Dragonlance Chronicles.
Was-
And I have read them more times than anything else.
Was the audience that you were speaking to at the moment related to whether or not you would be open about?
Not always. It's just it's a thing of whether or not what you're willing to admit to everyone around you. And as I've grown older, that's less and less.
Well, I was just thinking, maybe we've been on with this conversation, maybe we've been on the wrong tack the whole time. Because we've been talking a lot about marketers and genres and all that. But I don't think that's really the reader's problem with who sees their covers. Their problem is when their girlfriend comes over and the book, or a date comes over, and a book makes them seem a certain way. So it seems to me that it's mostly
Just
about
presentation,
seeming.
Yeah.
So the stereotyping of readers.
It's not like what marketers or genres or any of those people think. It's your neighbors, the people
Yes.
around you.
Yeah.
And like if you have a certain kind of book on your shelf, what they think that means about you.
The same way you'd be judged for not cutting your yard, or the same way you'd be, we fear that, we experience it, so...
Well, you get fined if you don't cut your yard.
Well,
there's that too.
But going with what Matt's saying, I've seen this on the opposite version, which is I will walk into someone's house. I am a writer. What's the first thing I'm going to look at? Of course, people's bookshelves. And I see these classic books. I see the books that you're told, oh, this should be on your bookshelf, and you read. And then I look at the dust. And I know they might have great expectations, and you name the book, and it's never been touched. And if I was to take it out and actually open it, you can still hear that nice little crackle of first time opening.
One of the great scenes in The Great Gatsby is of one of his sycophants at one of his big parties going into his library and saying, oh, they're real, the books are real. Mm-hmm. And I think that is an interesting thing to talk about too. Do people read it all? And according to Chuck Galozzi and Value of Reading, 1/3 of high school graduates never read another book for the rest of their lives.
Holy cow.
Oh man.
I believe it. My mom, who I take care of, she's in the 80s. She's in her 80s. She does not read books. I do know, and she will not admit to it, the last book she read was Empire Strikes Back, and that was in 1980s.
Okay, so we've all mentioned the us and them categories that we put people and everything else into. And it is easier for us as people to comprehend the world around us when we can categorize things quickly before we get to know them necessarily. Because, otherwise we would just go crazy. Too much information, can't filter, all done. But it sounds like we all do some level of judgment, categorization by what others' interests are and what we think they are like because of those interests. I'm wondering if the question is not, should we judge people, but how far should we allow that judgment to take our relationship with that person?
Well, I'm kind of going back to that original example, and what you said, Fedora, kind of struck home with me, because I think it's not totally a bad thing if that particular woman looked at those particular books on that shelf and said, not for me. All right. Maybe that wasn't the right match. And, so I stand by what I read, and if someone's going to judge me by those covers, that's fine, because I'm a little broader than probably my bookshelf would say even, because I read, like you, Brad, I read everything.
I agree with you. It was her problem, not his problem.
Exactly.
But she's looking for a specific kind of person, maybe not one who's going to be excited by the adventure within a YA novel. Maybe she doesn't read very much at all, and she would much rather see that he had a bunch of sports trophies on his
or DVD
cabinet.
collection or something
I
like
keep
that.
wondering though, what if those were a roommate's books, or what if those were his sister's books? He hadn't wrapped them yet.
There are
Didn't even get a chance.
I don't think that argument's going to help you if you're going, they're my sister's books, really? No, I'm serious.
No, but I mean,
I don't think that's going to help.
There are a lot of assumptions that go into
Yes.
it, especially just in that, if she sees the Twilight on there and is like, oh, he must have that on there because he likes it. What if it's really it's full of highlights of things that he thinks are terrible?
Yeah.
And it's just he's writing some horrible dissection of it.
In any date, you're going to make 1,000 assumptions and 1,000, different opinions about the other person, and some of them are right and some of them are wrong. Who knows? But are we to be judged by a lot of that? It's going to happen. So, but the question is, should we judge readers for what they read? And personally, I got to say no, but I think it's human nature.
We shouldn't, but it's probably going to happen anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm hedging my bets there.
Undercut.
I think we do judge other people though, and it's part of how we relate to them. I think it becomes a problem when you look down upon them as a them and not an us for what they're reading, especially if you're not familiar with it. Familiar
Can't we
enough
all
to make
just read
a
along?
judgment. Say that again,
Hold
please.
hands.
Yes, can't
Turn
we all
the
just
page
read along?
for the person next to you.
And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for your time, and thank you for listening to Right Pack Radio. Theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her. Right Pack Radio would like to thank STL Books for allowing us to record in their office. STL Books is a online bookstore specializing in new and used high-quality literature, children's books, and books written by or about St. Louis. Please visit them online at www.stlbooks.com or find their store on the Amazon.com website.